In this video, I'm going to show you the latest version of the Material Plane hardware, which is almost good enough to go into production, so that will hopefully happen soon. So the new hardware is here on the left with the beta hardware on the right. So let's start with the bases. So the biggest difference between the new bases and the old bases is the size. The new bases are a bit bigger, 30 millimeters, compared to the old bases, which were 25 millimeters. The big advantage of this is that there's a smaller chance that you will accidentally block the infrared LED with either a bigger mini or your hand. So the second change, which is quite obvious on first sight, is that there's no longer an LED on the left. So the old bases had the red LED on the left and the infrared LED on the right. The red LED was only used to indicate that the base is active, while the infrared LED was the one that was actually functional. This was a bit confusing because when you tell people to make sure that there's line of sight between the infrared LED and the sensor, they'll assume it's the left one because it's the only one that's visible, and ignore that you can actually see the infrared LED on the camera, but in real life it's invisible. So the new base has moved the red LED to the right next to the infrared LED. So this should clear up this confusion. So a change in how you actually use the bases is that the old bases used an accelerometer, which meant that the base would become active the moment you tilt it. So while this is nice because you can just grab the mini and move it, there were some complications with it. So first of all, it was too easy to tilt the base back too much, which would mean that the sensor above would not be able to detect it anymore. Similar to how you cannot see the red LED anymore, while right now you can. And the second problem was that I noticed that people would move the base or the mini gently, which would not actually activate the base. So that was a bit of a problem. And for some people, even if you told them to actually tilt the base properly, people would still make mistakes, which is just not user-friendly. So the new bases don't have an accelerometer anymore. Instead, they're touch sensitive. So what you have to do right now to move the base is simply grab it on the side. So that's why I have these curves in the base, just to make it very obvious that that's where you have to grab the base. And then it's hopefully a lot more user-friendly, and well, just it makes more sense, I think. Another nice change is that there's now felt on the bottom of the base, which will come standard. So you decrease the chance of damaging the TV that you're playing on. So let's then move on to the pen. So some big changes for the pen are that I've gotten rid of the screws. There actually aren't any screws left in all the hardware. So instead it just uses clips to hold everything together, which well, works pretty nicely in my opinion. It looks much better because, well, right here you can see how the screws are just ugly. I could have used black screws, but I think this is just much nicer. Another change is that the charging and programming contacts no longer have a bump in there, and we'll get to how it's also changed on the dock in that regard in a bit. And I've removed the slider, which would enable the pen, and right now it just goes after some use, the pen goes to sleep, and well, it uses basically no power, so there's really no need for a power switch. So this pen also uses an accelerometer to switch it off by turning it upside down. So this was quite convenient because, well, it just switches on the moment you flip it over, and then you could just use it, and when you're done, flip it around, and that's it. The new pen doesn't have an accelerometer anymore. Since I'd gotten rid of it in the base, I thought I'd just get rid of it in the pen as well. It just saves me from adding an extra step, buying a special component just for the pen, when it's really not that necessary in my opinion, because now it's sleeping, so barely using any power at all, and then the moment you touch one of the switches, it switches on and stays on for a bit. So right now, for demonstration purposes, it only stays on for a few seconds, but in the final version it will stay on for a bit longer. So if you wanted to use it, you would switch it on, you could use it for a bit, maybe just hold the button to make sure it stays alive, and then when you're done you can still flip it over. It would just keep on working for a few seconds, but then it would switch off and do basically the same thing as the old pen. So I've also moved some of the buttons around. So the old one had a button back here which was used to rotate stuff. I just liked it better to have them all in the front, and I mean you can still touch it and rotate, so that's not a big issue, and I think like this you can just assign it however you want to use it and not be hindered by the fact that this button is in the back, so you really have to move quite a way to get there. And there's also an extra button, so right now we have 4 buttons, and they're labeled, and the old base just had 3 buttons. Sorry, the old pen. It's also a bit thinner, and well, the old enclosure had issues. As you can see, there's a gap that I just couldn't get rid of properly, at least back then. But with the new ones, it's just much cleaner, and there's no seam in the middle of the pen. It has been moved to the bottom, as you can see. And the last change is that there's an extra LED over here, which is the charging LED, which has been moved from the dock to the pen. So in the new version that I've got coming in, the LED will be in the center, which is a bit nicer, I think. But well, that's just small details. So let's take a look at the dock. So I can just place the pen, and as you can see, it the charging LED starts lighting up. So when it's blinking red, it means that it's charging, and the same happens for the base as well, except that the base is currently not empty enough, so let's change that. Yeah, so it's blinking red when it's charging, and it switches to a static green when it's done charging. And the blinking is there to help colorblind people. I got a comment that just having a static red and green colors can be difficult to distinguish for some colorblind people. So hopefully, like this, it's a lot better. You can barely see the red LED for the base, but yeah, it's blinking just like the pen. Of course, the whole dock is a bit bigger compared to the old one in order to fit the bigger bases. And the reason I've moved the charging LED to the pen is so when you place one of the expansions, apparently just on it's done charging. When you place the expansions, for the old hardware, it would actually block the charging LED. So right now there's no way to know whether the pen is charged, while over here, or you can see it is charged right now. So that's quite a nice change in my opinion. So another difference you can see is that for the beta dock, when there's nothing connected, the LED is, well, kind of orange, and then placing a base down switches it to red, and then when it's done charging it switches to green. But the problem is that, well, the difference between the base not being connected and it charging is not that big. So for the new dock, the LEDs stay off until you actually place the base down. So let's move on to the one last thing about the dock is that with the previous version, similar to the pen, I had a seam right here, which, well, it's just ugly, and I had some printing issues. Well, it just didn't work out. I actually had to sand these down to get them good looking, or at least good looking enough, while the new dock is just printed much nicer. You can see there's no longer a seam. I've moved the seam to the bottom, so it just looks much better. And the charging pins, so for the pen, the old dock had some part that was extruded over here. For the new one, that's no longer the case. Only the pins stick out, and well, because of some design changes, it just works out. For the old one, it was necessary because, well, some limitations with the pins that I was using, and to make sure that everything was connecting properly. So let's now move on to the dock expansions. Not a whole lot has been changed. Of course, the new ones are a bit bigger again because the dock and the bases are bigger. But functionally, they're identical. Again, the new ones are printed much nicer. You can actually see some problems here, which was, well, because the top part was just very thin and it actually had to fit magnets in there, and well, it was not a good design. And the new ones, again, the seam is on the bottom instead of on the side, so you just get a much nicer print. They function the same, just place them on top of the dock and well, it'll start charging whatever base you have on there, assuming it's connected, of course. Then we have the sensor expansion. It's the same thing, better print, a bit bigger, also just fits on top of the dock. And then of course you can fit the sensor on there. Because the dock is a bit bigger, the sensor fits within the whole dock area, so that's quite nice. For the old one, the sensor was actually a bit too big. And finally, let's move on to the sensor. So from the outside, there's not a whole lot of obvious changes, except that I've moved all the connections to the other side. I've removed the screws, so again this one is using clips similar to the rest of the system. Yeah, they're basically the same size, so the new one is just a tiny bit thinner, but well, that's very minor. So if we take a look at this side, the old the beta sensor, to power it on you would flip this switch, which basically just exposes the actual switch on the PCB, while the new one just looks a bit prettier with a printed switch that well, just looks nicer. Another big change is that I've removed one of the LEDs. So for the beta sensor, one of the LEDs was used to indicate the battery status, and the other one was used to indicate that the sensor was connected to Foundry or something else. I think this second LED really isn't that necessary. I mean, you'll notice quickly enough when it's not connected. Foundry gives you error messages when the sensor disconnects, so it's just taking up space and makes it a bit confusing to know which of the two was used for which function. So the beta LEDs, well, you can actually see the LEDs, they protrude a bit from the enclosure. For the new LEDs, I've basically followed the same pattern of most of the LEDs, which is just a well, a small insert, a small light guide, I guess you could call it. So it just looks a bit nicer. I mean, the old LEDs do have some advantage, mainly that you can see them from a bigger angle, but well, I don't think it's a very big deal. And lastly, there's the addition of these two buttons. So we have a reset button and a boot button, which basically puts the microcontroller in bootloader mode. Both of these are there mainly in case the firmware somehow gets corrupted, preventing you from uploading a new firmware to fix it. So with these two buttons, you can basically always fix it unless the board is actually broken. So, well, that's at least the changes that you can see on the outside. There's been more changes on the inside, which is the case for basically everything here. I've gone over most of those changes in the last post on Discord, so I'm not going to go into that right here. So I hope you found this informative, and well, I'm hoping to be able to get these produced within a few weeks, and then finally be able to ship them out to everyone. All right, thanks for watching.